Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's WRRC Water webinar on Conjunctive Water Management for Sustainability. I'm Sharon Megdal. I'm Director of the Water Center, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all today. Just a little housekeeping. I ask that you please keep yourselves muted. After the presentation, there will be time for a moderated Q&A. Please use the chat function to enter your questions. We will be recording this, and the recording and slides will be posted to our website, usually within about a day, sometimes a little longer. So you will be able to access that there. You'll get notified when it is available if you have registered your email address. This webinar will go for 75 minutes till about 15 minutes after the hour. We know some people have to leave for other appointments at the top of the hour, but we'll be going for about 15 minutes after the hour as there are questions. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. The university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and indigenous communities through educational offerings, partnerships, and community service. I would like to bring your attention to some of our upcoming events in December and then into the new year. There will be a Native Voices in STEM seminar on December 10th featuring Professor Sherry DeVore. On December 15th, we have a special 90-minute webinar on the how of water diplomacy. We've got registration open for that. The speakers who will all be connected to a recent handbook will be noticed soon. And then we have some events coming up, including our fun Chocolate Fest in February, a colloquium featuring author Sharon Udison about PFAS, and then our annual conference is coming up April 14th and 15th. John, if you want to advance the slide, if you're there. Yeah, we haven't opened up registration yet. That will come in 2026, but the conference will be in Tucson and also live streamed. And then also we want to remind people that our photo contest is open for entries. We have a broad purview for it this year, anywhere in the world. And you can use that nifty QR code that John developed or go to our website for entry information. I believe we're closing entries in about a month. I think it's December 19th or 20th. So with that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker, Randy Hanson, who's president and lead hydrologist for One Water Hydrologic, LLC, where he helps scientists and engineers use the new One Water Code for their food and water security analysis and for assessing climate variability relative to conjunctive water management sustainability. Randy worked as a lead research hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey for over 38 years. Randy was working there when we first met, and there he helped implement hydrologic methods and water supply analysis of regional watersheds, both nationally and internationally. His research includes the development of integrated hydrologic models across the U.S. and internationally, and he led the development team for the One Water version of ModFlow, for use for conjunctive water management, climate change adaptation, and sustainability analysis, such as California's Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. So Randy, thank you for being with us here today. I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll come back to moderate the Q&A when you're done. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining me for today's discussion about conjunctive water management. I'm going to share my screen and get this show on the road. So what we're talking about today is really conjunctive water management. I've been giving this talk at a variety of locations, including in Mexico at the Association of Mexican Geohydrologists back in September, and we're very excited to be able to share this with you again today, and some of the ideas that we have from the publication of these two books through John Cherry. If you're familiar with the Freeze and Cherry hydrology book, for those that have taken a formal hydrology class, he started the groundwater project, and he has an amazing team of a lot of the really the best of the best hydrologists and scientists helping him with the groundwater project. So do go check them out. All of their books, including the ones that we've just released here on conjunctive water management, are free, and you can download there. You can also contribute to their effort as well if you so choose. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on here with conjunctive water management. And this is just kind of generally what I'm going to talk about today, and looking at what is conjunctive water management for starters. This is our book. This is the main book. I want to acknowledge my co-author, Richard Evans, who is a lead hydrologist for Jacobs in Melbourne, Australia. He also presented our book at the IAH conference, which was just occurred down in Australia in August. But really, conjunctive water management, we tried to redefine it and bring it up to date. And it's really the integral resource management of consumptive use from all the water sources for all uses, providing a diverse portfolio that facilitates reliable mechanisms for adaptation, mitigation, replenishment, and sustainability within a supply and demand framework for both human and environmental needs, and is connected to other potential drivers of supply and demand, including land use, population, industry, climate, and transboundary governance. So this is really a holistic kind of approach to the whole thing. As part of that, though, what we also like to remind people is that conjunctive water management doesn't happen in a vacuum, that you really have to align management governance with a framework of the climate cycles and growth. And based on the work that I've been doing with my colleague from the Autonomous University of Chihuahua, Dr. Renteria Villalobos, we've really identified that there's at least four major categories of climate variability that have to be considered. There you have your annual, interannual, you have interannual to decadal, you have multi-decadal, which is really where you're building infrastructure for development, climate change adaptation, and then also multi-century, which is really about governance and sustainability, mitigation, adaptation. But you also have to also keep in mind how these are playing out with respect to the supply drivers and the demand drivers. And so really conjunctive use then is really going to be the combination of precip, surface water, recycled, imported, saline waters, groundwater, all to use optimize the use and quality of all the water resources throughout the watershed, and not just within the alluvial aquifer basin, but the entire area. Way back in 2010, where Smarty started to look at this, and it's still noteworthy that the stress drivers on water reuse from climate change and population economic development are the two big drivers that really threaten sustainability. And this is from his 2010 publication, and it's really noteworthy to see that it's really the combination of population drivers, demand drivers, and climate change that are really going to make things difficult moving forward. And so do keep that in mind, that it's not just about the water itself. Let's look at some fundamental concepts of conjunctive water management. And this is, again, drawing from our book. Really for urban supply, what we have are what are called informal or unplanned or spontaneous. And informal and formal are the definitions that UNESCO uses for either structured or unstructured water supply frameworks. And so really for urban, it becomes much more convenient and better to have an external well fields, increased available total waters for a larger water resource supply, but also cannot exceed the rate of groundwater replenishment, requires reuse, recycling, artificial recharge. Unplanned systems have a tendency to be random and end up exceeding the unplanned urban supply, especially for periods of drought and other things like that. So that's not a good way to go, but that's how many systems evolve. They start out unplanned and become planned. The same goes for agricultural settings. And really what you're looking at is that plans, CWM, which is Conjunctive Water Management, has improved canal water distribution networks and more widely spaced groundwater use. So you have greater water availability and flexibility with less environmental impact. So really this is key to that. But it also includes other demand drivers, so limiting land use development, conversion to permanent crops, which hardens demand as an issue, climate variability. And then finally, CWM framework requires supply and demand analysis. So you have to be able to look at where these waters are coming from and what's driving their supply and their demand. Let's look a little bit at the technical and management differences between surface water and groundwater. And one of the ones that I love to mention, and if you haven't been there, you need to go down to the coast of Sonora on the Sea of Cortez, just north of Ciudad Obregón. The district, the Rio Yaqui Irrigation District, is really one of the best, what I call smart valleys, where they've developed a formal system. So they went in with Siemens and developed a server system, and they automated their entire operations so that they have monitoring operations, modeling and analysis is all being carried out and can be done from a control room. If you look at their system inside their control room, they have an interactive map. They can tell you how much each well is pumping. They're controlling 530 wells, several reservoirs. They're getting climate data and everything all in one control room, and it's really the wave of the future. And we're seeing it in many other places. I know that you're familiar with the Imperial Irrigation District in Imperial Valley of California on the Mexican border. Their Maya Dormo drives around in a pickup truck with a laptop now, so he doesn't get out and open and close delivery gates. It's all done automated. Many other places are also doing that kind of activity. So this is really the wave of the future, and is really the underpinnings of a conjunctive water management is having a self-updating model and a SCADA system. We've done a little bit of that in California with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, enacted in 2014. And really what you're looking at is that we have this, what I call the 6 deadly sins, the constraints that they try to put on to ensure or enhance sustainability within a groundwater sustainability region. And that includes limiting groundwater declines, storage reductions, seawater intrusion, water quality degradation, land subsidence, and depletions of interconnected surface and groundwater. And nested in that is also some kind of preservation for groundwater dependent ecosystems. There's a lot of other constraints that have to go on. The Sigma doesn't include impairment from adjacent development, so that's a bit of an indirect issue for Sigma that will hopefully get resolved in the future. But also these other issues here are really important, including climate change, expanding land use, hardening demand, fish passage for stream flows and stage requirements is a big thing in many of the areas that we're looking at in California and coastal areas. Habitat maintenance, the GDEs, alternate water sources, supply management and demand management are a big part of this equation, and also water quality requirements, and finally transboundary impairment of groundwater and surface water resources through treaties and other agreements. And transboundary can be between irrigation districts as well as international boundaries. Let's look at some informal and formal systems. Informal systems, again, the unplanned are really in conjunctive use of surface and groundwater most commonly occurs where canal-based irrigation systems really started out, and they're inadequately maintained, unable to sustain design flows through the system. They're poorly administered, typically allowing unauthorized or excessive diversions, and typically not measured either. Outstretched capacity of surface water availability for dry seasons, and tied to rigid canal delivery schedules and unable to respond to crop needs or drought conditions. So this is really a major issue with informal systems that we can overcome by having a more formal system and more organized types of analysis. So for highly versus poorly connected, let's take a look at that. One of the things I like to harp on quite a bit in my many talks is really the fact that another element of conjunctive use and conjunctive water management is wellbore flow. And this is an example here from the work that we did in Santa Clara Valley, aka Silicon Valley, where we helped them with develop a model and multi-well monitoring sites and whatnot. The diagram that you're seeing here is from San Jose Water Company. They're the oldest water utility in California. We went in and were able to look at the wellbore flow under actual production conditions. They developed well fields where they had a whole bunch of wells in a relatively small area, but they only operate a couple of them at a time. And so, really, what you end up having is pumpage occurring here with most of the water in the well coming from these upper screens, well screens. But these other wells that are turned off are actually facilitating wellbore flow that's coming down and recharging these deeper aquifers. And so when we went in and did depth dependent sampling, we find that the water down here at almost 800 feet is 97% modern carbon with an uncorrected carbon 14 age date of about 1600 years. We developed a multi monitoring well site fairly nearby, about a mile away. And at that same depth, we're really looking at anywhere from 2,500 to over 17,000-year-old water. So this kind of wellbore flow can be really important and in particular, wellbore flow enhances vertical flow for deep aquifer recharge, stream flow recharge, and it actually reduces land subsidence as well. So this can all be very important in that aspect of conjunctive use. When we look at it in the context of a broader area, the entire Central Valley, what we're really seeing is that wellbore flow becomes really important in areas that have confining zones that are not allowing for vertical flow. So there's two components of vertical flow. There's interlayer flow and there's wellbore flow. And you can see that in some of these that are down here at the bottom of the graph, some of these regions, they have almost no, this is a percent of vertical flow that's wellbore flow. And you can see that some of them have almost no they mainly have interlayer flow and almost no wellbore flow occurring, but others are significant and where they have confining layers, such as cork and clay, and it can be anywhere from 10 to 50, 60, 70% in these regions, and it can grow through time as they develop more and more wells. So this really becomes an important component of conjunctive water management and knowing how the water is getting to these deeper zones during unpumped conditions. And when we look at what the World Bank looks at, they have done kind of the Forrest Gump approach on the whole thing, where they really have simplified it down to these four categories of local shallow, major alluvium, complex, and karstic types of aquifer groundwater systems. And as we know that pumping can really also affect these aspects of stream flow, both capturing and contributing to water, depending on the system at different times, whether there's pumping and recharge going on. What we've seen from that is that the layering, as you all know, in alluvial systems is really, really critical. And we also know that the utility of groundwater systems really have become kind of a buffer in many, many regional systems where they're using it as in nature's insurance, so to speak, from climate change and other aspects that are going on. Also, the connectivity between surface water and groundwater systems is really important, and the related vertical distribution of well screens. I'm involved in CV salts, which is looking at salt and nutrient sustainability in the Central Valley, and we're finding that this is an incredibly important aspect of what we're doing to look at the assessment of the fate and transport of salinity and nitrates in the Central Valley. Hydraulic connectivity depends on the degree of connection between the two sources and the time lag. So it really can happen quite quickly on the order of days or weeks, but in other areas it can be decades. And all the surface water and groundwater systems are connected. And it's just a matter of time for the impacts to be felt across the connection. And when we try to, again, kind of in a qualitative way, look at what happens for various responses and characteristics for groundwater and surface water, we can see that for many of these things, time to recover from depleted resource, time to recover from seawater intrusion, or from land subsidence can be anywhere from decades to never. Whereas in some of these surface water settings, it can anyway be from months to years. So it's really a very different dynamic for the two, but they have to be considered together, and that's our point in this book. Let's look at some of the benefits of conjunctive water management. We think that where groundwater and surface water are used conjunctively in various parts of the world, you still have these common perils. And Foster and Van Stagenberg emphasized that informal conjunctive use of shallow aquifers in irrigation systems is driven by the capacity of the groundwater to buffer growth in land use. And that's, again, one of the demand drivers. But we really want to see that there's greater water supply security with CWM. There's securing existing crops and permit new crop types to be established that can be done in a more orchestrated fashion. Better timing for irrigation, plus extension of cropping season. Larger water yields are also possible, especially if you're getting into reuse of water, recycled water, and I'll show an example of that. And also reduced environmental impact, and also avoid excessive surface water and groundwater depletion. So these are really some of the benefits that we hope, as well as maintaining groundwater dependent ecosystems and habitat and other aspects of the environment. What's the role of managed aquifer recharge? Is a big part of CWM, and we're seeing it more and more in more places. And of course, we had Bismarck in Tucson a couple years ago. This is again a diagram from our book, but what we're trying to do is look at what aspects can be brought to play, so that really when you have imported water, which is being used more and more in many places from satellite basins and so on, also reservoir overflows, which are commonly overlooked, and flood flows, as well as the natural runoff. We have urban stormwater, treated sewage, and desalinated water. So these are all the components of surface water that can then go into conjunctive water management, as well as be used for managed aquifer recharge, and also for direct irrigation use or seawater intrusion injection barriers. So we can kind of start to broaden our portfolio of what types of water we use, and how we can mix them together. And that's a critical piece of conjunctive water management. Here's an example of that. This is from the Central Valley again, and the top graph here is showing the cumulative departure of precip at Davis. The gray bars are the dry periods, and what the lower graph is looking at the total water banking spreading that's been done throughout the Central Valley. And then the orange curve is the recovery. So they're pumping back, and you can see during these dry periods, they're banking before and after during the wet periods, but during the dry periods, that's when they're extracting water. So we're already seeing this dynamically occur. And this is something that we also are simulating in the new Central Valley model that was developed and released by the USGS last year. So this is a great example of how this works. Here's another one that we worked on in the Monterey Bay area of California for Pajaro Valley water. And really the question here in conjunctive water management becomes, our subsidies and incentives, are we rewarding the wrong production practices? And I think that this is a prime example. This was one of the few GSA areas in California that was exempt from scrutiny, because we had already been developing a monitoring system, a conjunctive water management program, and a model to analyze this. So what they were having problems with is seawater intrusion. They're right on the Monterey Bay and adjacent to the Monterey Submarine Canyon, which is actually larger than the Grand Canyon, but underwater. And it's a short circuit for seawater intrusion. And so really what they've done is this was the Pajaro Valley Water Management Agency was developed back in the 80s. They have a pumping tax, and they actually are required to report pumping. So that covers O&M costs. And then they have a recharge credit, which is a newer thing, which is separate. So if you capture recharge running off your land and recharge into the aquifer, you can get credit for that. You have to measure it, whatnot. Now, they don't have a reservoir here, And the reason why they don't have a reservoir is because the back of the basin is the San Andreas Fault. So that's a no-go for having reservoirs. So it's really all about local solutions. They also have alternative supplies, so they replaced the coastal pumpage, which was driving seawater intrusion in this area, with the coastal distribution system. So they have one of the world's largest wastewater treatment plants that recycles the water from the city of Watsonville, and they also have an ASR right in this area here. And so they have these regions, 16, 17, 8, and 9, that are then have pipe systems that go out. And what you were required to do is to disable your well. You don't destroy it, but you disable it, and then you're able to receive this other water for irrigation. And they're not still dealing with tile drain waters, capturing and reusing those. So that's still to be uh, enhanced in this system. A lot of this is strawberries, and it's from Driscoll Farms. And ironically, in contrast, Driscoll is also, and others are using over 80 reverse osmosis desalination units at wellheads to treat groundwater contaminated with seawater intrusion instead of preventing seawater intrusion like we're doing here. This is down in San Quintin in the Baja. And San Quintin is the third largest strawberry production, berry production area in all of Mexico. So they've dealt with it differently down in Mexico, but this is what we're doing here. And when you get to how we can actually then simulate this hierarchy of various uses as well, using our USGS ModFlow 1 water code. And so here are these delivery areas, and they get various percentages. We're capturing runoff from a slough and then putting that into the ground here with recovery wells. So we have an ASR. We also have the wastewater treatment plant here, and so we can then deliver these different sources of water, and then we can simulate this hierarchy of preferred sources of water in our integrated hydrologic model for this region, and to assess how the feasibility and how it's working for us. And we did that, and there's several publications on that if interested. So really what we're talking about in the sustainability framework goals is to bring the aquifer back to a dynamic equilibrium in some way, and that reduced extractions, which is demand management, adding supply sources, and both using groundwater and replenishment or alternative supplies, conjunctive use. So when you have overexploitation of water here, the groundwater deficit is this big portion of it, and we hope that we can reduce that back to this portions by using a combination of demand management, alternative supplies, and also managed aquifer recharge, as well as flood mar and other things to help enhance replenishment as well as demand management and alternate supplies. We've done some of that here in California. We're also innovative in the context that we now have a formal system to permit what's called flood mar. So managed aquifer recharge of flood waters. And as in many places that have reservoirs, the reservoirs overflow during extreme wet events. And we've facilitated in California a way to facilitate the use of that water. And Dr. Dahlke and others at the UC Davis have been doing field tests and whatnot, and really have found that and this is from her work, that it's really quite achievable to get quite a bit of water under different settings and different soil types and whatnot, and different types of agriculture to add additional water. And it also gets back to the idea that one of the things that my European colleagues and whatnot really like to advocate for totally efficient irrigation, but in fact, inefficient irrigation in many of these settings is one of the major components of recharge. So in our situations, inefficient irrigation is typically not a bad thing. But this is the work that she's done, and it's really shown that it's quite feasible. And we get back to field capacity within a month or so. So really, that water then infiltrates down to the aquifer through the soil and root zone pretty quickly. The other thing that we can do is that's an aspect of water quality in managing conjunctive water management, is simulating the demand from salinity flushing. So we ironically have farmers in various places that are quite proud that they're irrigating and growing crops where they shouldn't be, and typically with saline waters. And what we've done with our One Water Code is we've allowed the additional ability to assess what the additional demand would be, water demand, if you need to do salinity flushing. And this is something that we're looking at for the CV salts in the Central Valley as well. And you can see that in this example here that we're just looking at the percentage of increase in water demand can be 22 to 38% more irrigation with and without salinity leaching. So to add salinity leaching and we can assess it by the total water demand. We can also then look at it's 20 to 80% more groundwater pumping. So we can look at it in the context of the water sources, how salinity leaching affects things. And then finally, we can do it on a crop by crop basis within individual farms. And we can see that salinity leaching in this example was 22 to 43% more over not leaching for vegetable row crops and 24 to 34% more for orchards. So it really is a large impact in any way you want to slice and dice it here. So this is an important part of conjunctive water management as well. Let's look at analysis and modeling approaches for CWM. And I always enjoy showing the hydrologic budget diagram that is used by the California Department of Water Resources. And really what they end up saying is that you have four hydrologic flow budgets that really need to be looked at. And this is how we do it in Sigma. And one is for climate, the other is the land system, surface water, and groundwater. So you're really looking at the interplay of these four different systems and how they interact with each other. And that's really the cornerstone of successful conjunctive water management, is really looking at sustainability of all four elements of the flow. We've also seen this in more specific examples, such as the Lower Rio Grande in New Mexico, where we're looking at people are assessing stream flow gains and losses with annual seepage runs. And so you can actually see here where we have losses to groundwater during some times and gains to the river during other wet times as well. So this is an important element of looking at the interplay between groundwater and surface water systems. I wanted to just digress briefly and let people know, and many of you that are hydrologists already know this, that there really are different kinds of numerical models. There's simple groundwater and surface water models that really treat the other flows as just simply as specified user-specified boundary conditions. We have passively coupled models where the output from one type of water, like a watershed model, is then used as inflows into an integrated hydrologic model of the valley floor. And then there you have your fully coupled hydrologic models, such as power flow or hydrogeosphere or whatnot, that try to solve for everything everywhere all the time. We think that this middle approach, the passively coupled, is really the way to go for many of the things we do. And there are many other types of watershed models. I didn't mention SWAT, but that would be another one that could potentially occur in this category, that can be used as watershed models that can be passively coupled to an integrated hydrologic model of the valley. That's kind of how we do it. So this is kind of a showing how ModFlow Ohm is set up for conjunctive use modeling. And it's really a fusion and update and upgrade of the ModFlow 2005. So we've really brought all that in. We then use the basic characteristics model for our surrounding watersheds, sub-watersheds, to bring in not only to estimate precip and potential ET throughout the valley floor, but also mountain block recharge and runoff, which is mountain front recharge from the surrounding watersheds. This is an easy way also to plug into global climate models. And a lot of this is the BCM stuff is using the PRISM data. And then we have other inputs that we need. Land use and supply and demand subregions are defined. So if you want to get the newest version of the USGS ModFlow, which is still right now is the only version of ModFlow that's being currently supported by the USGS, here's the website there. The one things that's unique about the One Water Hydrologic Code is that we have the farm process, and within it we do counting by what we call water balance subregions. And a water balance subregion is defined as a group of land uses with a common water supply. So they're getting all of their surface water and groundwater and other sources of water from these common sources, so that we can then really estimate what's going on in each of these colored subregions, which are different water balance subregions. We also don't need to do the kind of crazy discretization that I see in other models, such as SWAT models and whatnot. So we can actually not only estimate supply and demand for each of these subregions, but we can also do fractional land use within each model cell, which really is an economy of simulation as well. So we really are looking at a variety of water sources and a variety of land uses all being talking to each other. What we typically see is in these kind of settings is the groundwater surface area interaction and capture analysis is one of the things that is really powerful. And we did this for the Lower Rio Grande, which I'm happy to say that Supreme Court dispute has been going on forever, is finally being settled. But this was the crux of the lawsuit, and that is that as you increased pumpage, you got less surface water diversion. So less pumpage equals more deliveries. So these are the deliveries here, and this is less pumpage here. And so really the fact that pumpage was interfering with the stream flow and the canal flows and whatnot was a big problem and is being resolved through the litigation and the analysis by others. What we typically advocate is that when you're doing an integrated hydrologic model for CWM sustainability analysis, is that you really start at the back end of things and really define the sustainability analysis objectives and metrics, which is also what they do for Sigma in California. And then the design starts with your final question. So you really want to be able to build a model that has the supply and demand subregions that will be meaningful for the kinds of analysis that you want to do regarding climate and sustainability. And so you define these supply and demand frameworks, your subregions, and then identify and estimate components of this framework, and then you can build your model components. So this is the workflow that we advocate for doing this. Again, this is in the book, so I won't belabor the details here, but this is our kind of our workflow master roadmap. So in the process of doing this book, we had Eileen Potter and Mary Hill and Claire Tiedemann and various people that were my editors, and they said, Randy, this is all really great, but we need some examples for students and practitioners so they can get a better handle on how this is all going down. So no good deed goes unpunished, and so I ended up taking. We had my colleagues John Traum at the USGS and Scott Boyce, and we've been teaching this OHM class all over the world for years. And we had the last day of the class, we had all these examples, and by the time everybody got to the last day of the class, they were pretty fried, and so a lot of times they didn't get the proper treatment that they should and attention. And so we made a book out of it. And so we're really looking at these 6 scenarios that were part of our OHM class, and which is what happens if you add an urban well, or the effects on stream flow and subsidence, a change of crop type. We're going to change winter wheat to vegetable row crops or orchards. What's the effect on water demand? So the winter wheat is mainly being grown off of precip, and now you're having to irrigate these other crops and grow them different seasons. The addition of salinity flushing, what are the effects on water demand and water sources? And the adjustment of water demand to equal supply for sustainability. So really, this is sometimes known in the legal world as adjudication. You're trying to bring demand down to something comparable to what's being supplied in a watershed. And then finally, the last scenario is change in water supply and demand due to climate change is a big one. And then finally, this one here, which is unique to the One Water Code, we actually do reservoir operations. And I think we're the only open source code that has reservoir operations. The surface water operations package processes in this. And so we really look at adjustments of surface water operation, the effects of reservoir operations and operating framework on how to enhance the surface water deliveries and reduction in pumpage. So you get these 6 scenarios, several of which have more than one aspect to it. It's a fairly detailed model. It's the one that we've been releasing since 2014 with One Water. And I won't belabor this. 7 layers. There's 7 regions. And we have several observation wells and whatnot. And so really, and then we also provide analysis with each of these scenarios. So we're looking at groundwater and landscape water flow budgets in comparison to a base case where prior to the alterations of those 6 scenarios. We look at groundwater surface water hydrograph analysis, pumping analysis, farm supply and demand flow budget, which is something again unique to the One Water code. We look at subsidence and recharge as well, so we can get all of these different types of analysis for those different scenarios for you. And when it comes to the surface water operations, the reservoir operations, we really are looking at the reservoir storage and release, which are connected to the farm process and the streamflow routing process, so they're linked, as are many other things in the One Water code. And we're also looking at the effects of surface water and groundwater deliveries. And we also can account for allocations, carryovers, allotments, deliveries, district charges, and credits. So really, with this type of scenario, we can look at a lot of different aspects of how we take a project with these off-grid reservoirs, and then subdivide it into these districts, and then within the districts you have units, which are the farms, and how the water supply and demand is occurring at these different levels, and that's really useful in that regard. Really want to look at CWM developments. Really, CWM really you have to have some governance. This just doesn't happen in the science world all by itself. You really need institutional strengthening, policy and legislation, planning, market and pricing approaches, and we go over this in the book. Actual implementation and building knowledge and communication. So really authority through policy and statutory powers is vested in the government and delegated to an agency to administer, regulate on behalf of the government. This is really an important element of what goes on. Transparency, in particular, transparency also has to include public outreach, monitoring, and data sharing. So, for example, I was the leader in the USGS over what's called the settlement agreement, which was the Salinas Valley. All these different parties, from environmental groups to irrigation districts, all sued Monterey County Water Resource Agency, and so they brought in the USGS, a neutral entity, because we're not a regulatory agency, to develop the model. And one of the things that we did is that we had regular meetings with all these parties and said, look, this is as we developed the model and analyzed the data, this is what we're doing. And it really provided not only transparency, but kind of a put up or shut up kind of framework, because they had 6 weeks to then provide questions or notes or issues with what we had done. And it was kind of put up or shut up. And as we went through the process, it was transparent, and they had a mechanism for input and interaction with us on a formal basis and whatnot. So the transparency is really critical in every way. And it hopefully reduces any kind of follow-up litigation. Stakeholder participation is part of that whole process in the example I just gave. And finally, institutional and technical integration is really required to ensure that all the aspects of the water tenure are subject to a single basic resource regime. And that's really essential in that regard. Building knowledge. We have technical understanding and supporting and funding. Without money, this doesn't go anywhere at multiple levels. And then finally, whether you have direct financial incentives or disincentives, or indirect trade-offs or offsets, we talk about that in the book, so I won't belabor that, but there are different ways of doing this, and it's been done differently in different areas, everything from the free market experiment in Chile to what we're doing in California, so it's worth doing in that regard. Finally, there's no single path to conjunctive water management. There's a lot of things that interplay with each other, and these are just a few of them. And it really kind of underscores how everything from the governance to policies to population and land use and climate variability and operations and analysis and monitoring and conflict and sharing and adaptation mitigation all play back into really a dynamic path of conjunctive water management. And with that, I will call it a day. And I'm happy to take on any questions or commentaries. The picture you're seeing here is from Pajaro Valley. Those are some of Driscoll's strawberry fields, and we're hoping that groundwater sustainability always equals strawberry fields forever.
Ah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Randy. You covered a tremendous amount of material. Maybe for now, if you want to stop sharing your screen,
Sure.
so we can see you, and there's lots of claps. You covered a tremendous amount in your slides and elsewhere. I do want to mention, because some people came on after you started, that the book you're referring to is the book that you contributed to the groundwater project, John
Right.
Cherry's project. I don't know if Jesse put a link into that, but make sure we have the link, Randy, so that when we send out the notice of the recording being available, we can include that in the email just so people have ready access to it. And it may have been in an early slide as well, but I do want to note that the book he's referring to is freely available for download, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
As
So,
are all the books that are there. So,
yes, which are a lot of books. And I have a bunch of questions. I only see one. Oh, now I see some others coming in, as usually happens. It looks like Mike Carpenter, who I don't know, did you know him from USGS?
oh, we go way
Carpenter?
back.
Did he remove his question there? There was one earlier, but maybe you answered it. Because I'm only seeing Jim Ruff's question, and now Dan put one in. But Jim Ruff earlier asked the question right when you started, and I think it's a good question, is what is the difference between conjunctive water management, CWM, and integrated water resources management, such as has been promoted, explained by American Water Resources Association and others for years. So maybe you could answer that question for us.
My guess is that they're probably fairly similar. We've just made sure that we've taken a conjunctive or a holistic approach to the definition. We went back and tried to find as many definitions of conjunctive use as we could, and most of them were really focused on humanity. And we wanted to go beyond that and make sure it included environmental requirements as well and whatnot. So my guess is that they're probably very similar in
Yeah.
definition.
Yeah. And then Dan did ask if we could reshare the link. So if
Which I did.
why am I not, I did not see that going to everybody. Did you put
Oh,
it in?
oh, I'm sorry. Wait, sorry about that. Let me try that again. Yeah, let me just, yeah, and Mike Carpenter's question was asking me about wellbore flow, but we won't belabor that. He helped me with the WR52, which is there in the park near South Point High School, and
Ah,
and that was converted into an extensometer. But when they turned the pump on, we got expansion in the extensometer. And what he helped me do is put a very thin copper wire all the way down, insulated wire, and we made a Wheatstone bridge, and we discovered that wellbore flow was shrinking the extensometer pipe.
no. All right.
So
Well, while we see if there's some other questions, I
sure,
made note of a couple that I'd like to ask you. By the way, I may see Helen Dalkey at a 4 o'clock meeting this afternoon, and if I do, I'll mention to her that you mentioned her and her work. She does wonderful work.
yeah,
That is for sure. Um, you mentioned a number of different places where this modeling has been used. You mentioned the role of recharge, and as you know, I've been doing some work, particularly on groundwater along the border with Mexico for some time. But I also advised a PhD student who, for part of her dissertation, looked at recharge in the context of Mexican law, the water law of Mexico,
right.
which may be undergoing change. But my understanding there, and the question is, does this work in Mexico to use recharge is that once you recharge the water into the ground and it becomes groundwater, it becomes controlled by the federal government. And while it may benefit the aquifer from a wet water standpoint, it may not benefit the user as much. So, are you finding obstacles in Mexico to use of recharge as part of this kind of one water approach?
No, and what's interesting about Mexico, and this would be quite a discussion on its own. They have also the ability to do private pub government partnerships, and so they have a totally different governance construct. And so they've had different parts of Mexico where they've gone into partnerships and developed these projects. And in other areas, such as down near La Paz in the Baja, they have been really developing quite a few using gabions and other things to enhance recharge from extreme events. So, but to answer your question simply, no, we're not seeing that as a problem because typically any recharge is ultimately going to benefit the end user.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I saw Laura Norman put her thumbs up, a big person involved in gabions and that kind of recharge and so
Well,
forth. So,
yeah, she's involved in the work in Baja too. So yeah,
yeah, yeah. So there, as usually happens, the questions are coming in, so I'll put mine aside for a moment. But Dan asked how you define urban farms in the models, and he says that would seem to be the most likely type of agriculture in the Tucson Basin, if you're, just looking at the Tucson Basin.
right. Well, and that's the term urban farm is unfortunately a misnomer held over from our early days of developing the farm process and whatnot. But an urban farm is just an urban area where that urban area is getting all their water from uh, the same common sources.
Oh,
But as far as the demand in an urban area, there would be urban landscaping, parks, and
okay.
and so on and that kind of thing. So it's a little bit of a misnomer, but that's basically what represents an urban farm.
Yeah, that is interesting. That would not be what it would convey in just plain English
Right,
to
right,
most people.
right.
But thanks for that. And then there's a question here by Marussia about how should these studies be implemented for efficient management under the 1944 International Water Treaty between the US and Mexico? What action should we take to ensure that decision makers consider these studies and they don't remain just at the scientific level? And I might even add to that, and this is something, Randy, you're very familiar with, and you talked about it, is that the treaty, at least in the Colorado River, tends to focus on surface water only and not groundwater, while it might be different in the Rio Grande. But I just would add that. But to Marussia's question,
Yeah,
can what should be done so that decision makers take these studies into account?
well, they need to, and they need to get more scientists involved, and that's been I think a problem with IBWC SELA that they have this incredible mechanism to develop these minutes, so they don't have to go and they can modify the treaty easily, but they don't always get all the technical information that they need to. And what your point is excellent, that in the Colorado they haven't really addressed groundwater, and what we're seeing in the Rio Bravo, the Rio Grande, is that they've really overlooked these extreme events and the real drought cycle. So we've done a bunch of analysis, and I've worked with Marcia Renteria on several of these things for the Rio Conchos, and none of that's being considered. We actually ended up making very specific recommendations on how the treaty should be modified. And ironically, the Treaty of 1906 was much more modern prior to the reservoirs than the current treaty as far as accommodating drought and whatnot. So hopefully they can start to really bring in this information and look at both groundwater and surface water as you're indicating.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, what you said about the 1906 versus 1944 treaty. So Barbara here is taking us in a different direction, an important one. And I'm sure you know, as a hydrologist, hydrogeologist, that this is something a lot of people are working on actively. And I don't know if you're involved with Thai Ferry's efforts to get widely deployed master's curriculum uh, adopted and deployed to train the hydrologists that are needed in the consulting sector for this work. So Barbara asked a question: in the US, which field related to water has the broadest job market and which one has a better future? That's a really interesting question. You're a hydrologist. There's all kinds of things for people to get trained in. But Barbara, maybe you can clarify. Are you talking about surface water versus groundwater, or what? Barbara, no, Bahara. I'm sorry, my eyes aren't seeing it. Bahara, what is your question? Is it focused on studies in hydrology, or you're asking broader than that? Because I'm not sure, Randy. I don't know. Maybe you do want to answer.
I can at least reflect on that. And
sure.
we're most of the consulting firms that I'm dealing with and others and agencies here in California are in a world of hurt for hydrologists. And that's why what Thai Ferry is doing, trying to get more people involved and get an accelerated master's program going for hydrology is really critical. We just don't have the people to do this work. But the other side of it is it's become much broader and more holistic. So it really does. I think the best job market outside of being a water lawyer is to be a scientist of some kind in this field and have a broad background. My undergrad degrees are in math and geology, and so it wasn't until I worked at Los Alamos Scientific Lab that I put the two together. But this is everyone is dabbling in or including multiple disciplines in what they do.
Yeah, and I'll put in a plug for this broader based approach to studies. And I, as someone who works on management and policy and teaches a graduate course in that, first of all, I love having hydrology students in my class, but they usually benefit from being in my class because, as one said to me, I know how to do the modeling, but after taking your class, I understand better why we're doing the modeling. And so, having a rounded approach. And I recently got re-engaged with Ty's effort because I looked through some charts and I didn't see policy mentioned. I saw regulation, but it's broader than just the regulation. Anyway, I think we're in agreement on that. A question came in about, if you came in late, we will be sharing the recording of this in the slides in a day or 2 days maximum. And anybody who's registered with their email will get notification on it or can just visit our website. So Randy, I said I had a couple of other questions that I'll ask, and then I'll see if there are any more. I think I've asked most of them, and you answered. It's an open source code, so people can get the code. Right. And I guess my last question that I made note of is, so how widespread is the use of this one
water code is actually surprisingly widespread, and it has been. And we've been at this. It started with the development of the farm process at the University of Arizona. Wolfgang Schmidt's PhD dissertation, and the brainchild for it was the work that we had done in Ventura, and then ultimately for him and Tom Maddock, who was his advisor, was the Lower Rio Grande, and then finally the Central Valley. But we're using this all over the place. My colleague Scott Boyce and I, for example, have a PhD dissertation student from the Technical University of Munich that is modeling Kobo Valley in Ethiopia. Which is a little dicey because that's where the Tigres are and all that going on. But so we're using it in a wide variety of locations. It's been used in Argentina. It's been used in Mexico. It's been used in many other places. And we see a lot more applications, especially with the ability to do the reservoir operations and so on.
Yeah, and I remember when Wolfgang was here, and maybe you were involved in a meeting where he was promoting, and I guess for his dissertation, studied some of the ag lands over in California, if I'm remembering correctly.
Right.
Where is Wolfgang now?
He is in Perth, Australia, working for CSIRO.
Okay, so he's been there a while. He was there when I
Yep,
was in Australia.
yep,
Okay,
yep.
good to know. We lose track of people sometimes.
He's close to retirement, but he's still kicking.
All right, well that's good. Um, I'm just looking to see. I see some thanks and other things in here. I don't see any additional questions coming in. I'll give it a minute or so. Okay, so Ada just asked, you run into water quality issues with CWM. By the way, I really like the comments you made about incorporating the water for flushing.
Right.
So for the salts, that's really an important component. But what about water quality issues and CWM?
Yeah. Well, and that reflects a little bit on what we're doing with CV salts right now. But I tell you, I've had farmers get up at town hall meetings and proudly claim that they're growing stuff where they shouldn't be with salty water. And so it's not only a demand issue, but it's also a water quality issue. And what we're seeing in CV salts in the Central Valley of California is that what we're able to do is that we are assessing more detailed subregions with using the One Water code, and then we're linking it, and we've upgraded and are modifying the MT3D transport code. And so we take output from, they also ran a swap model. So we have a kind of a combination of models that are running together, but we're trying to assess the transport, fate and transport, and those aspects of water quality. But in many places, it's not just the wells. There's return flows, there's drain flows, which are a huge issue. So there's a plethora of different components of salinity and water quality issues. And that also includes geogenic contaminants that are being mobilized from the aquifers and whatnot that can be as much of a problem as salinity itself. But also stopping using soil amendments like gypsum and other things like that are going to be an element of water quality issues.
So, a lot of the examples you talked about, and you indicated, Mexico and other parts of the world, but a lot of this is going on in California, where, from my non-hydrologist perspective of things, I think for local hydrogeologists and hydrologists, it's been kind of a full employment act over there and more because, there's so much going on. Would you say that because of Sigma, this approach to modeling has gotten a big boost? Would you see
Oh,
as much of it
yes.
going on?
Yes. What's ironic is that Sigma doesn't actually say you have to do a model. You just have to do a water budget of some kind, and it could be on a napkin, or it could be fully blown integrated hydrologic model. But they get to review what you've done, and so you're going to get you're going to be graded and assessed. And if they don't like what you're doing, the state can come in and take over.
Yeah, yeah.
To answer your question simply, yes, modeling is driving most of what everyone is doing.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in. Randy, you covered a tremendous amount of material. Obviously, you're a pro at giving this presentation, and we appreciate your making it understandable for those of us who are not hydrologists, but you got some of those graphs in there nonetheless. So
All right.
anybody who wants to go back and study, and I think you may have had your contact information on the last slide. If people
Yep.
want to get in touch, it's okay.
Yes.
And with that, lots of claps and thank yous, and our thanks at the Water Center for a great seminar. And
Well,
thank
thank you,
those of
Sharon and
you.
Jesse and everyone for having me and facilitating this presentation.
Well, and thank you all for being here with us. So have a great day.
All right. Saludos.
Saludos.